Hey everybody, great to have you back here in the fish tank. You know what time it is? That's right, Minion Masters Meta. We're going to go through and see which are the most played, the strongest masters, cards, all that kind of good stuff. If this is your first one, just a quick behind the scenes. I scrape the leaderboards multiple times every day, put all the data into a big spreadsheet, and then we extrapolate from that what we can. We base our assumptions on if things are in the leaderboard, if things are high up in the leaderboard, if things are played a lot in the leaderboard, then that must mean they're strong. Now, this is going to be for the current patch, which is 2.1. Let's dive in and find out what we can. Just a reminder that we will go through a lot of information, so if you need to pause the video, if you need to screen cap, slow down, whatever you need to do to take in all of this useful information, please do so. Right. The first thing we're going to look at is the master popularity. Now, of course, last season was the addition of Tronvir, and Tronvir was everywhere. So this is the overall master popularity. We've got the three modes all added together. So yellow is 1v1, 2v2 is the kind of ready colour, and blue is pre-made. So last season Tronvir was the most played. This season Apep is by far and away the most played master. You can see there with the yellow on Apep, he's dominating solos. Tronvir the second most played, but as you can see, very rarely played in solos. More of a 2v2 master, it seems. And then third place seems like Stormbringer and Morelia. So Apep's gone up 10%, Morelia's gone up 7%, and then we've seen Tronvir drop by 10%, Setsu and Stormbringer dropping by 6%. So quite a change based on, I assume, the back of the nerfs to Tronvir. Right, let's dive in a little deeper and have a look at the master popularity per mode. So as always, we've got the two graphs. On the left is the previous season 2.0, and on the right is the current season 2.1. So we can see this season solo is dominated by Apep, up 13%. We've also seen a small increase for Valorian as well. Tronvir dropping off. Surprisingly, we've heard a lot of talk about how strong Tronvir is. We saw him in the tournament recently. Lots of tournament bans as well, but not getting played out there on the leaderboard. He's dropped down 11% from last season. Diona's also dropped off a little bit, 4%, as well as Milloween and Kingpath. The average mana cost staying the same at about 3.7. If you're new to the game, we always say try to keep your average mana between 3 and 4.5. The lower, the more difficult it's going to be for you, really. So somewhere between that. Okay, so that's how it's changed for solos. Let's have a look at randoms. So master popularity in randoms, most popular master is Tronvir, same as last season, but you can see that kind of peachy colour on our graph has shrunk substantially. Big reduction, Tronvir down 15%, but with Tronvir dropping off, who's going up? Well, we've seen big increase for Morelia, and smaller increases as well for Milloween, Volko, and Ravager. So we can see the top three masters in randoms this season: Tronvir, Apep, and Morelia. So Tronvir still number one, but nowhere near as dominant as he was previously. Again, mana cost around the same, 3.8. Right, let's have a look at pre-mades. Pre-mades last season, Tronvir number one. This season, also Tronvir number one. But Tronvir has dropped off. We can see Apep's increased as well. Biggest increase for any master is Apep, followed by Mordar and Morelia. Setsu again, quite a big drop-off. As well as we've seen there, Tronvir and Milloween dropping off as well. Average mana cost going up quite a bit. It seemed like it was very low last season comparatively. Right, so Tronvir still there or thereabouts, but not as dominant as he was before, especially in solos. Okay, let's have a quick look at the rarity composition. So remember, we've got 4 rarities of cards: common, rare, supreme, and legendary. We've got 6 graphs. The top 3 are the current season, the bottom 3 are the last season. We've got the 3 modes, and nothing really changes with this, but I think it's always important to remind people that most decks are mostly comprised of common cards. This is not a game where you need a deck full of legendary cards. You can see the green, the common, the majority of decks are comprised of commons. And then we've got rares, supremes, and legendaries in there as well. But as you can see, you don't need legendaries throughout your deck. Okay, let's have a look at the factions. So the factions are kind of like the families. And we can see that the overall faction this season is Voidborn, whereas last season it was Empyrean. So Voidborn's gone up 6% overall this season. Same with Slither. I'm not surprised to see Slither. There's a lot of Slither cards that are good in this meta. The Snake Druid, the Musketeer, for example, to name just a couple. Crystal Elf dropping off, which is a little bit surprising since we've had some new Crystal Elf cards, but they haven't been great really, and Empyrean dropping off as well. So the top 3 factions overall by play rate, we've got Voidborn, Scrat, and Empyrean. Again, let's just drill down a little bit to see if there's anything that we can discover. If we look at the faction composition per modes, again, current season top row, previous season second row, solos dominated by Voidborn, Zenshi, and Scrat, but then Empyrean is a bit of the flavour of the month when we get into 2v2s. Empyrean, Voidborn, Scrat for randoms, Empyrean, Scrat, Voidborn for pre-mades. So Voidborn really getting a play rate uptick in all modes. Not entirely sure why, but that's what we see. Okay, next up, we're going to have a look at the wildcard usage. Got the wrong background there. And the reason I've got the wrong background there is we didn't use this slide for last season, because the way that the leaderboards were implemented in the game is they didn't have wildcards on there. But they have added that now. So what we've got here is current season 2.1 versus the last season of data, which was 1.511. As always, no wildcards in solos. But one thing to see is a big increase in wildcards here in pre-mades, which is pretty surprising. I did go back and double check my data to make sure that was right, and it indeed is. So increase in wildcards, which I hate to see, honestly, but it's a part of the game, and if you want to play it, then you're well within your right to do so. Randoms hasn't changed too much, but pre-mades definitely has. But which cards are wildcarded most? In randoms, we've got the Woodsman, the Lost Legionnaires, the Skeleton Crew, and Lady in Frey. And then in pre-mades, again, Lost Legionnaires, Gax is... I feel like Gax is a bit of a problem card that needs some kind of adjustment. People will yell at me for that, but they're just basically Gax players. Doomcleaver and Scrat Pack. Lost Legionnaires overall the most wildcarded, even though it did have the copy removed, and I think they're going to get changed in the next update as well. Right, so let's have a look at the top cards. Remember, if it's got a green border, that means its position's gone up. Red, position's gone down. If it's white, position has stayed the same, and if it's black, it's a new card. So we can see that Fergus is the #1 card there. His play rate didn't really go up, but we did see others around him go down. The Bounceberry Flingers dropped down with the nerf to the Shrooms, as well as things like the Scrap Pack as well, which was a very heavily played card that fell down quite a lot. So let's have a look what we can see there. The top spell there overall is Chain Lightning. That hasn't really changed much, and we've got a lot of cards here that if you've played on the leaderboard, you're very familiar. A lot of the Outlander cards that we see, and a lot of the decks in all of the game modes, and the removal spells that you would expect to see there, things like Beam of Doom and Blade Star. And one thing to remind you, we spoke about how most cards a common. Most decks are comprised of the basis of common cards. There's only one legendary in these top cards. 4 supremes, 9 rares, and 13 commons. And a quick quiz. From the data that I collected, there was only one unused card. What was it? Answers in the comment. If you're first, you might get a prize. One card that was unused from the leaderboards in any game mode. Okay, so those are the top cards overall. Let's drill down a little bit and have a look at the game mode. So these are top cards excluding spells in solos, randoms, and pre-mades. So, not surprising to see the Woodsman, Groggy Woodsman, and the Caber Tosser in there in solos. Definitely see a lot of those. Increases in play rate in solos to Sapphire Pebble, to Swarmers. I think Swarmers are increasing because of the nerf to Scrap Pack. Snake Druid also getting an increase there in solos. As we mentioned, there's some Slither cards that are very good in the current meta. 2v2 pre-mates and randoms. Fergus, the number 1 played card. Looks like he's getting a nerf in the upcoming patch, but I would like to see him more of a weaker single target, but strong multi-target. Currently, he's strong, either or, which doesn't seem, appropriately balanced if we think about it. Okay, so those are the top cards. So overall, Fergus was the most played card, followed by Bounceberry Flingers and Swarmers. Right, so those are the top cards, non-spells. Let's have a look at the top spells. So if you're looking to build a deck, these are the good starting places with your removal spells. So the top spell in solos, we can see that Chain Lightning dropping off from number 1, being replaced by Morgrul's Mark. We've also got Hypnotize in there, which is pretty decent in the current heavy unit meta. And we've also got some Accursed in there as well. We've seen some increase in solos for Wheel of Doom to Sunburn, to Sacrifice, and as mentioned, to Hypnotize. But the biggest fall off in solos was Chain Lightning. We've also seen Impetus Blast dropping out. Remember, it did get that damage nerf. In duos, in randoms, the most played card is the Blade Star. And again, we see the Chain Lightning dropping off down to 7th from 3rd. Also, Beam of Doom dropping off as well. So some cards really dropping off. Big drops for Chain Lightning and Beam of Doom, as mentioned there. Blade Star is number 1, but did get quite a big drop off still. We've seen some increases to Unholy Ground, to Vortex, and to Shock Rock. Maybe people playing Shock Rock instead of Impetus Blast. In pre-mates, we see that the Chain Lightning's still there, number 1, but we've seen some increases to Wheel of Doom, to Scrutillery, and drop-offs again to Impetus Blast and Morgrul's Mark. Overall, Chain Lightning still the most played spell, followed by Bridge Buddies, Beam of Doom, Blade Star, and Daggerfall. Okay. Next up, Legendaries. Newer players are always wishing to get their hands on Legendaries. Remember, you don't need a deck full of Legendaries, but there's a lot of strong cards that you can build your decks around. And if you've got some shards, if you're itching to craft some, these are some really great Legendaries that you can build decks around and get a lot of value out. So one thing to notice in solos, we see the Snake Druid is the number 1 Legendary. And that's really a reflection of the meta. All those heavy Stoutheart units, heavy Zenshi units, the Snake Druid really does do exactly what it needs to do against those. Very strong in that meta. Jinlong's still there, but dropping off. Quite a big decrease to Jinlong. It's the most reduced played card in solos, but still second. And we see, again, reflections of the meta there. The Hypnotize, Musketeer in there, Jolo, Howling Moon, all of these good against those big, heavy decks that are out there. In randoms and pre-mates, again, Fergus Flagoon Fighter, sorry, is the number one. He did have quite a big decrease in play rate, but it is still dominating there. And I think that's just to show he was hugely played before, and he still kind of is everywhere. No wildcards allowed on him anymore, but we may see that reduce a little bit in the next season when he gets nerfed. We'll see. Reconator in there for those strats with your scrats. But interestingly, Jinglong only showing there in solos, just on the board in randoms and not there at all in pre-made. So we've seen a reduction in play rate for Jinglong for some reason. Hasn't received any nerfs or anything like that. We do see overall Fergus, of course, is by far and away the most played legendary. Wheel of Doom is second, Jinglong is third, Veilstalker and Bara is the overall top 5. So some very different cards there. Some cards that some are very specific to decks, others are decks you can really build around, cards you can build around. So some good choices. Right, next up we're going to have a look at the decks. So I've changed it up a little bit for this month regarding the decks. So what I did previously, we have basically a ranking for all of the cards, and then we would average that out over the decks to see which decks were comprised of the lowest ranked cards, and that was the way we did it. But this time I've changed it up, and we are basically looking at decks that have been very high up on the leaderboard, which probably makes more sense. So these are not necessarily number one decks, but they are very close to the top of the leaderboard when they were captured. But we do have a smattering of different masters as always, and some different strats as well. So hopefully it keeps it interesting. We see that the APEP deck at the top there, the number one deck, that's been at the top almost all season, I think. It's got the Zenshi, it's got the Stoutheart stuff in there, but it's also got the anti things like the Snake Druid, Morgul's Mark. The second deck is an interesting one. This is Wist's deck, I think, which this is the deck he plays a lot. Didn't really get too much value in solos, I think, previously, but this season it seems to really be suiting him. Again, he's got all that anti-big unit tech with the Snake Druid, the Hypnotize, the Musketeer. Armoon is great as well. Right, we've got a Tromvir deck in there as well. Pretty standard, as you would expect. Then we've got Valorian, which isn't like a full Empyrean deck, but it does have Ardera in there with some Empyrean units. And then we have Diona Korgoth, which is a very different kind of deck, but Voidborn based and a lot of fun to play. Korgoth, very strong. Right, so those are the top solo decks. Next up, we're going to have a look at the top random decks. Again, we've got an APEP deck. Lots of familiar faces. We see Fergus smattered all around here. Heavier removal spells, as you would expect in 2v2s. We see the Beam of Doom everywhere there. King Puff, that's the deck that I've been playing this season. Got to number one on the leaderboard with that. A lot of fun. Bladestar is kind of frustrating to play, but once you get once you kind of figure out the way your angles, you get huge value out of it. Interesting Stormbringer deck in there. Lots of ranged units. Radic is always a fun time. And then we have Milloween. That's the new Milloween icon. And it's an accursed Milloween. And then next up we have our pre-made decks. So this is kind of the pick of the bunch. So again, we've got a Tromvir deck with a lot of familiar faces in there. Same with APEP. We've got a Stormbringer deck with lots of ranged units. Setsu makes an appearance with some cheap spells, some powerful spells, and some big units. And Milloween again, this time using the Resonating Construct. A couple of those in the deck to try to get value. And also 2 Resonating Blast Crystals as well to trigger between them. Right, so those are the decks. One thing we're going to have at the end of this video, which is almost now, is we're going to go through the top cards per master. But the video is long enough already, so we're not going to really spend too much time on each of these. We're just going to whiz through, and if you want to screenshot or pause and look at the data, you can do. So there's our top cards for APEP, followed by our top cards for the owner. Remember, the number of decks that were captured is at the bottom there to give you an idea if it's a good sample or not. Next up we have King Puff, followed by Milloween. As you can see with Milloween, lots of accursed cards with Milloween. That really seems to be the flavour of Milloween decks. Accursed Milloween. Right, next up we have Mordar. Ritual of Servitude, as you would probably expect in there, plus lots more heavy units. Morelia. Looks like the 1v1 Morelia is heavily influenced by that Wisp deck we looked at, and again, lots of accursed cards overall. Okay, here we have Wrecked. Followed by Ratbo, and as you would expect, you see a lot of Scrats rearing their head in there. Next up we have Ravager, so we see lots of kind of aggro cards, things like the Rammer in there, the Brutish Betrayer, the Bats, the Dragon Ball. And also we've got Korgoth showing there in randoms. Right, following that we have Setsu, as you would expect, lots of spells. Interesting to see a Demon Warrior there in 1v1. And really just the cheap spells that you would expect, plus the heavy units. Stormbringer top cards. Ranged units, as you would expect, to get those marksman perks. Now we see the same for Tronvir. Give you an idea of the kind of cards that people are playing with Tronvir. Lots of Stout Hearts and Empyreans in there. Next up we have Valorian. Shield God of Light absolutely everywhere. Ardera is there somewhere. There we go, in pre-mades. Probably there and thereabouts in all the modes, but just in the top there in pre-mades. Volko next. And that is the completion of our look at the meta. Okay, there it is. We had a lot to go through as always, but hopefully we went through it in a pretty concise way, but gave you a lot of information that you can screenshot, as I said, go back, revisit, use as you wish. Let me know if there's anything that you saw that you were surprised about, anything that you thought we were going to have but didn't, anything that we do have but shouldn't have. Always good to have a discussion there. Interesting to see Tronvir dropping off, not surprising. For me, the surprising thing is he's not really showing on the leaderboard in solos, despite everyone saying how strong he is. But we'll see if he gets any balanced treatment in the future. And that's pretty much it. If you enjoy this content, make sure you let me know. Hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, say hi in the comments. And that's pretty much all I want to tell you about. So, my name's Bad as a Fish, and I'll see you again soon here in the fish tank.